Previously on Homesteady. Nice. It's funny how a decision on the homestead sometimes that you've been like working over and over and over suddenly can be made for you so quickly.
We were trying to figure out which bucks to keep for breeding this year. It was a hard choice because they're all so pretty. But then the decision was made for us.
With Gizmo dying, Bomber.
We're gonna send him along to his next breeding home. I'm gonna send Burke on to his new breeding home too.
And she's actually going to the homestead that we bought Gizmo from. She wanted Ruby. So like Kay said, there are a lot of things that we would do differently if... So how do we close this up?
Alright, so now we talk about our ideal goat herds. This is my future goat herd. When Austin and I talked about all of the things we've learned, we of course don't agree on everything. Going forward, our future goat herd, what would it look like? You say yours first, because mine kind of just is a contrast to yours. Mine's just the opposite of yours.
In the future, if I were to bring goats back onto this homestead, I would do it very, very differently. I would actually, myself, I would mimic in a smaller version how they created the Kiko goat. Not too long ago, we interviewed Garrick Batten, the individual who bred the Kiko goat. It was not a thing, and now it's a kind of goat you can find and buy.
Well, it's a Maori word. You know, the indigenous people in this country. It's a Maori word for meat.
This is Garrick Batten. He and his wife are the people responsible for the creation of the Kiko goat breed. To hear the story of the Kiko goat, we have to travel far, far away. We'll be flying southwest out of San Francisco, past Hawaii, over Tahiti, and before we make it as far as Australia, we'll be stopping at the beautiful, sunny island country of New Zealand.
But agriculture has been the backbone of this country since it was first settled, and it's still the major. It produces about 60% of our export income, so it's pretty important.
Incredible.
And there's only, less than 5 million people. I mean, we produce enough food to feed 10 times the population.
Garrick was filling me in on New Zealand because, like he said,
most people in the United States don't actually understand New Zealand. Or
Garrick didn't expect us to know much about New Zealand, but maybe Garrick didn't expect that I was such a big fan of Lord of the Rings. If you've seen those movies, then you have seen New Zealand, because that's where they filmed the entire 3 movies. And so now you know what kind of land the farmers of New Zealand are working with. Most of New Zealand, well, it's not the Shire. Most of New Zealand is much more...
It is a barren wasteland, riddled with fire and ash and dust. The very air you breathe is a poisonous fume. Not with 10,000 men could you do
An impassable labyrinth of razor-sharp rocks. And after that, it gets even better. Festering, stinking marshland as far as the eye can see.
Okay, so maybe it's not that bad. But the New Zealand farmers do face a serious challenge.
is that it's basically a mountainous country in geological terms, and only 8% of it can be cultivated.
Because of this uneven terrain that they have to work with, well, one does not simply cultivate their land in traditional ways.
Not with 10,000 men could you do this. It is folly.
So that means that to produce food has to be coming from grazed pastures. A whole economy is based on grazing animals and turning the sunshine and the climate into plants which animals can eat, and then produce products which can be sold.
And the way that they did this, they took a huge group of wild goats, just thousands of goats. They herded them up. They selected for the most hardy animals that needed nothing, hands off. That meant very little lactation. That meant smaller size animals, not really big and meaty, but they didn't need all kinds of medication. They didn't need all kinds of care and maintenance. They were pretty much hands off, and when it was time to harvest them, you went out and you shot one and you brought it to the freezer.
The whole development of Kiko goats is based on population genetics. And population genetics is about arithmetic. It's not about parents. And so it recognizes that in a population there are good animals and bad animals, and the key to it is finding the good animals and breeding from them. So you need relatively large numbers to get a genetic spread big enough to be able to identify the superior animals to select and breed from. Having got a big enough herd to work with, and then having identified the superior animals in that herd based on recording, measurement and recording, assessment under the same, under a common environment, then you can then apply selective pressures, and the more factors you select for, the slower the progress you make. So if you can reduce that to just a few factors, you can make more rapid progress.
Instead of worrying about creating the perfect goat, Garrick focused on the perfect goat for the needs of the farmers in New Zealand. And that meant each goat needed
sound feet, so they didn't need to be trimmed or foot bathed or looked after. The goats could walk everywhere, every day without limping. Some resistance to internal parasites, because the climate we have here, which grows good pastures, also grows good internal parasites. So developing some tolerance to those was important. Having the milking equipment to feed the kids that we were trying to produce was obviously important, and kidding reproductive rate was critical. As I said, the more kids you can produce, the better off you're going to be. And temperament, because you need to have animals which didn't want to escape and which were amenable to looking after their kids and being compatible with the farming system. So on top of that, we practiced independent culling, which means that if the goat fails on any one of those factors, it gets culled. Even if it's the best goat in the herd for kidding percentage, for instance, if it limps, well, it got culled. And so over a period of time, we were able to produce a goat which basically didn't limp, had tolerance to internal parasites, and produced lots of kids, and ate weeds and grazed pastures.
If I were to get goats back on this homestead, I would find somebody who was on a similar kind of property, a similar area, who was trying to liquidate their herd. Maybe they were getting out of goats, and they were willing to sell a lot of them all at once. I would bring as many of those as I could afford and take here on the property. They would not be dairy goats. I have no more interest in doing dairy goats. I would like to do meat goats. And these meat goats I would put in the woods, fenced, on a large area of woods where they could run through. There's no pasture that are 4 inches high that they would wind up getting wormy on. It'd be all high browse like what you find deer eating. And I would have them in there, and after the first couple months, I would go and I would look at that herd, and I would pick half of them that were thriving, and the other half I would cull. They would go in my freezer. And then, in a few more months, or maybe another month, however long it took to distinguish the next half, I would do the same thing. I would look at that half, and I would pick the ones that were thriving, and I would cull the others, and those remainder ones would be my breeding stock going forward. That would not work at all with having my daughter be involved. She would never let me do this. This is just how, if I had it all my way to bring goats back on this homestead, it would be meat goats in the woods. I would cull heavy at first, and then I would grow from there.
To tell. Austin's the meat guy, if you can't tell. He's not the dairy guy.
Not the dairy guy, no.
Your goat would be, it would not be the Holstein of the goat world.
No, I would be breeding like
the Scottish Highlander.
Yeah. Yes.
It's not going to give a lot of meat. It might be slow growing, but it's going to be
hands off
and thrifty.
Thrifty as it could be.
All right, mine's not the opposite of yours, believe it or not.
Oh, I believe it. Mine's a great idea.
So mine, I like goats. I like having goats because of their personalities. They're like, I told Austin, they're like dogs, but they're goats. So they're a little, they have their own quirks and personalities, and I really like that about goats. We had one doe.
Somebody's stealing the show.
Of course. Can I keep talking?
Yeah.
We had one doe. She was an Alpine, Angora, maybe some Nigerian thrown in there mix. The man we got her from said he was working on developing a homestead breed. All that meant was she wasn't given a lot of milk. It was delicious milk. She kind of didn't do the best at anything, but she was a very hardy goat. Nice personality, very, very low maintenance. I think I would go that route again. Just kind of breed a mixed, have my own little breed, mixed goats. Once again, it's not something our daughter could be involved in because at some point you have to butcher something. Like, that's the nice part about keeping goats is weather and butcher. So for right now, I'll stick to the cows. My stocky little Jersey cows who give us some milk. Huh. Do you like the cows? You like the cows? Yeah. Yes, you do.
Amazing how things change very quickly on
so
homestead
quickly.
sometimes. Here we are again. Our homestead has no goats. For now, our dairy is covered very well by our cows. We're not worried about replacing that. We're going to do some huge projects to improve our homestead, try to fix some of the things that were wrong with it that led us here. And that way in the springtime you will look forward to some new animals. And that's just about all we'll say about that for now. We will miss our goats. Thank you to everyone's advice and tips for trying to help us save our girls. We tried as hard as we could. All the little babies are now off to nice homes. There'll be future, somewhere out in the world, there'll be a Homesteady goat line that continues.
Gizmo granddaughters.
Yep. You know, Ruby's, and we couldn't have picked a better place for her to go. We're getting updates, which is so nice. We're getting texts on how Ruby's been doing. And yeah, we learned a lot. I don't regret it. It was good to...
I don't regret having goats. We did learn a lot. Our daughter did a great job with them. Goats are never something I would suggest for a child to have sole responsibility of, just as going forward, just to tell people that we say they were our daughters. She took care of them, but she was not solely responsible for them. There's a lot. Goats are not an easy homestead animal, especially a higher bred dairy goat.
Yeah, it's something you need a lot more hands-on, and that's what ours were. We were very hands-on, but even we, with having owned 20 of them, here on this new farm, we got our butts kicked. Yeah. It was some new problems we've never experienced before. Like we said, we never lost 20 goats, never lost one to worms, and now here we've lost 2 in a month. And it's just like...
So we got the winter to kind of reflect on everything. And
make some plans.
And move forward.
That's what you do on a homestead.
Yep.
Thanks for following us along in this. It's been hard. I hope you can learn from the lessons that we've learned from. Hope you can learn from our mistakes, and hope you appreciate us sharing them, because it's not easy to share your mistakes, but it is the best thing we can do. I think it makes what happened at least have a little bit of silver lining. So let's go get some lunch.
Mama's boy. Are you Mama's boy?
Please forgive me if I'm a little slow going.
It's all right.
Oh no, didn't turn up the lights. Oh, your eyes got so big. Hi.
What are you doing, handsome?
He's mesmerized. Mesmerized by himself.
Another one back.
What's up up there?
Yeah. Don't forget it, right?
All right.
Please forgive me if I'm a little slow going. Years of fast living, stunning my growing. I took 2 steps forward and another one back. Started over so many times I knew